So during the White Lotus season finale, the terms Twink Death and Twink Resurrection both trended on Twitter. To me, in a way, Lochlan died for everyone's sins. And importantly, he resurrected. So what killed him? Well, it wasn't the gunman, it wasn't the Romans, it was something else. It was the poison and the protein shake. Hi there. Over the course of the season, Saxon made protein shakes whenever things got uncomfortable or boring, or when he wanted to drown out the noise of his female family members. Importantly, the morning after the full moon party, when Saxon finds out what actually had happened, his first instinct is to go make a protein shake. It's like he retreats back into the paradigms that he knows, his comfort, which is masculinity. But is all that masculinity a good thing? Can you have too much protein powder? Through metaphor, masculinity is seen as a cure-all. The protein shake metaphor was expanded when Saxon would try to push the protein shakes onto Lochlan. This was essentially Saxon telling Lochlan that he needed to man up. Lochlan struggled to get the protein shakes down throughout the season. We saw him kind of awkwardly chug them, make gagging faces. At one point, Saxon quipped something along the lines of, "You're not meant to enjoy it, just drink it." I think this is the way that a lot of sensitive men, whether queer or not, experience masculinity during their adolescence. We're told that we aren't enough just as we are. We need to become more masculine in order to thrive. Whether or not we want to become more masculine is never really the question that's being asked. Instead, we're told to just take it like a man. We have to grin and bear this cultural blend of masculinity that's being passed down to us from our older brothers and from our fathers. You can't just not drink the protein shake when your brother's shoving it in your face. If that sounded a bit suggestive, it's because that tension is what is at the heart of the Saxon and Lochlan dynamic. "You can worship me," Saxon explains to Lochlan when they finally have a conversation about what happened, "but you can't worship me." Now, worship has a few definitions per Merriam-Webster. The main two transitive verbs are as follows. 1, to honor or show reverence for as a divine being or supernatural power. Or 2, to regard with great or extravagant respect, honor, or devotion. Neither of these two definitions quite get at the distinction that Saxon is drawing. Saxon's interpretation of the word worship, in my opinion, is more colloquial. It's tinged with meanings muddied by an era rife with abundant, explicit online material available at any moment. When Saxon says, "you can worship me," he means that you can look up to me like the way that you would look up to a famous sports figure or an athlete. You can see me as a source of inspiration, and even, I'd argue, jealousy, but you can't worship me, as in submit to my power and aim to please me. Adult movies, the kind that Saxon was watching in the bathroom when Lochlan was just in the other room, often use worship to mean something different than just to look up to someone. To worship in the latter context is to submit, to please. This distinction in meaning is supported in the text of the script itself. Lochlan himself says, "I'm a pleaser." He excuses his actions at the full moon party by explaining it as, "I just saw you sitting over there and I wanted to make you feel good." But making another man feel good, submitting to them in a sense, is something that just cannot happen in Saxon's idea of masculinity. Yes, there are very problematic undertones to this entire plot line, namely the fact that the two are brothers, but I talked about that in my last video. I want to almost take the brother thing out of it because I think that's really what Mike White is exploring here more so than anything else. Actually, interestingly, Saxon wants Lochlan to worship him to some degree. I think that tension is curious. We draw the line somewhere. Clearly, Lochlan stepped over that line, but it seems to me that Lochlan was a very confused boy. We'll never know if he was actually a queer character. My interpretation is that he was, but I also think he might just be a forgotten character. This was exemplified when people just walked past him at the pool when he was literally dying. His mom, his sister, and his brother didn't stop to think, oh, why is Lochlan just sitting over there and not coming to join us? They barely paid him any mind. So it makes sense to me in kind of a psychoanalytical sense why Lochlan would want to basically be seen. In some ways, maybe the incident was a call for attention, but Lochlan's words himself were that he aimed to please someone. He didn't aim to get attention from someone. So these concepts are somewhat intertwined. I think when we want attention from someone, we want positive attention generally. I think pleasing is a very specific form, a more, dare I say, submissive form of showing devotion and respect and admiration for someone. That level of devotion and respect and admiration is normally, in a very heteronormative paradigm, something that women are supposed to show to men. This is not what I believe, by the way. This is just kind of the paradigms that we are unfortunately stuck with culturally. Submitting to another man, aiming to please him, makes Lochlan weak in Saxon's eyes. That's why Saxon immediately suggests Lochlan just make his own darn protein shake. The next morning, when Lochlan finally did make that protein shake, it killed him. The term worship is particularly interesting, especially given the religious imagery in the season as a whole. After kind of a moody in the water scene where Lochlan returns back to the ocean in a more Buddhist explanation as explained earlier in the season, Lochlan comes back to life in the arms of his father. The religious imagery is not subtle here. And when he wakes up, he says, I think I saw God. Was God the literal father figure holding him in his arms? Or was God the ocean and the darkness? The ambiguity almost doesn't matter here because Lochlan's storyline is not one of resolution. It's not one of finding out who you are. It's a snapshot of that window of confusion, that time of life for many queer people when we don't know exactly who we are. I think as a whole too, Lochlan's storyline doesn't represent a traditionally gay storyline that is one where we're focused on the coming out narrative. Rather, I think that Lochlan's purpose is to represent the growing number of young men who are identifying as not exclusively heterosexual. And that broad umbrella of sexuality can encompass everything from I wouldn't mind making out with one of my guy friends all the way to I would date another guy. It's kind of a broad spectrum, but it's a spectrum that Gen Z in particular seems to be adopting, which is that these paradigms of straight and gay don't always fit. To be clear, confusion about your sexuality does not lead you to make an incestuous move on your brother, but it's fiction. And frankly, I think Mike White probably did want a little bit of shock and awe this season. Lochlan took the poison that Saxon was taking and it killed him. By making Lochlan come back to life, I think that Mike White was trying to show a certain level of purity that Lochlan supposedly had. Lochlan was not sinless though. I think having seen the whole season, I'm willing to say Lochlan took advantage of Saxon. This fact doesn't make Lochlan an irredeemable character, but if Lochlan wanted to explore his sexual interest in the masculine, he should have done it with someone else, and he definitely should have done it with consent. Instead, Lochlan crossed the line. I still stand by what I said in my previous video, where I basically talk about the fact that at the heart of it, a lot of the fear here is that Lochlan made it gay. And that's like the bigger issue than the fact that there's like an incestuous plotline going on. It's complicated and it's not clear cut. And I still think that's the point. I think way too many people this season focused on the fact that they were brothers. I think what we should be focusing on is the fact that they are men. And the reason I say that is because we could have had this plot line with Saxon and Piper that would have been getting at misogyny and the way that sexual violence towards women is minimized, especially in a family dynamic. I think here what we're focusing on is at what point does bro-y male sexuality turn into something that makes us uncomfortable? The interaction between Lochlan and Saxon was frankly fascinating to me, especially in that final scene. Saxon didn't call Lochlan a slur or make any overtly homophobic comments really at all, but Saxon did want to just forget the whole thing. He was adamant, and his adamance that Lochlan just make his own darn smoothie, in essence, drink from the same source of masculinity that Saxon had derived his own metaphorical power from, well, that's telling. Mixing metaphors a bit, but also relevant. It was the seed from his father's fruit which poisoned him. And yet, his salvation came in his father's arms. His salvation came when his father, notably the only one who noticed that Lochlan was in danger, gave him the attention that he was seeking. Lochlan didn't need to please anyone to be saved. He just needed to be seen. But so often, pleasers can confuse the two, substituting people-pleasing for being seen. Do I suffer from this as well? Maybe, but that's a different video. The whole plot line was a very complicated and messy metaphor for queer male desire if I've ever seen one. Essentially, what we want is toxic to us. We want to please the masculine figures around us, but doing so too much can displease them. It's this toxic web that can cause a lot of despair and pain for a lot of queer men. I want to be closer to men, but becoming closer to men makes them want to push me away. Well, that is if they haven't sorted out their own toxic masculinity themselves. The lack of resolution with Lochlan's sexuality does complicate things. I still maintain that he represents the Gen Z men who identify as not exclusively heterosexual. Similarly, I argue that Saxon might represent the more right-leaning shift among younger men towards things like Make America Great Again and away from more healthy expressions of masculinity. You know, think like Andrew Tate, basically. Lochlan's weaker form of masculinity, that is his less aggressive variety, kind of kills him in the end. But he gets saved by basking in the support and comfort of a more positive form of masculinity, the protecting, caring, and nurturing masculinity. Literally a father figure. The last time that we see the Ratliff family is on the boat, and after tons of agony, Lochlan's father reaches a resolution. After saving Lochlan, he finally mans up himself, at least to some degree, and gives the phones back, and at least gives a somewhat inspirational speech to his family about how they're going to get through it. Lochlan's death, to me, clearly inspired his father to be a better man. I found the finale overall somewhat disappointing, but the season was clearly an interesting exploration of toxic masculinity. Rick's aggressive form of masculinity and vengeful form literally ended up with the one thing that he loved the most ending up dead. For the Ratliff family, toxic masculinity almost killed them, but a more pure form of masculinity saved them, at least partially. The central message of the season to me was that toxic masculinity ends up with nothing but more pain and suffering. Now I just have to wonder if Lochlan will ever get resolution. I don't know. He's fictional, but to the extent that I've created a parasocial relationship with a fictional character this season, I'm hopeful that Lochlan gets back to the US, lives a more stripped down life, maybe goes to university or figures himself out in some other way, and comes to the realization that what he did to his brother was not okay, apologizes for that, but also accepts his own desire for masculinity.